You spend 40 years working, you finally retire. No boss, no alarm clock, no Monday mornings. You wake up whenever you want, grab your coffee, and finally have the freedom you've been waiting for your entire life.
For a moment, it feels like you finally made it. But then the bills start arriving. Because the average retired American receives roughly $2,084 a month from Social Security. Ferrari insurance alone can cost around $650 a month. And the Ferrari? A new Roma Spider can cost around $280,000. So here's the question nobody asks. How rich do you actually need to be before owning a Ferrari in retirement becomes a luxury instead of a financial disaster? And when we do the math, the number is going to make that $280,000 price tag look almost irrelevant. There's something different about a Ferrari. You don't usually grow up dreaming about owning one because it's practical. Nobody puts a Ferrari poster on their wall because they want reliable transportation to the grocery store. You want one because of what it represents: success, freedom, status. The feeling that after decades of working, saving, sacrificing, and telling yourself, maybe someday, you finally get to say, I made it. And retirement seems like the perfect time. You don't have to commute anymore. You don't have to worry about putting thousands of miles on it every year. You could take it out on a Sunday morning, drive through an empty stretch of road, come home, put it back in the garage, and forget about it until next weekend. Sounds perfect. And for some retirees, it actually can be. But there's a massive difference between being able to buy a Ferrari and being able to own one comfortably. Because that $280,000 number you're staring at, that's only the beginning. Let's say you've got your eye on a Ferrari Roma Spider, around $275,000 to $280,000 for a 2026 example. You might look at that number and think, okay, I just need $280,000. Not quite. Because the moment you drive that Ferrari off the lot, you've bought yourself an entire ecosystem of expenses: insurance, fuel, tires, brakes, maintenance, storage, and eventually, repairs. And some of those numbers can get ridiculous. A set of high-performance Ferrari tires can cost thousands of dollars. A major repair can reach 5 figures. And carbon ceramic brake components on some modern Ferraris can cost tens of thousands of dollars. That's when the psychology of the purchase changes, because spending $280,000 once feels like a decision. Spending another $15,000, $20,000, or even $30,000 every year to keep the car is a lifestyle. And that is where retirement makes this calculation completely different. When you're 35 and making $200,000 a year, an expensive car is one thing. You have decades of income ahead of you. You can make mistakes. You can work longer. You can rebuild your savings. But retirement doesn't work that way. Once the paychecks stop, every dollar coming out of your portfolio matters. And suddenly, a Ferrari isn't competing with another car. It's competing with everything else you could do with that money: travel, healthcare, housing, emergency expenses, helping your children, or simply having the peace of mind that you won't run out of money at 78. And this is where the numbers get uncomfortable. The average Social Security retirement benefit is around $2,084 a month. That's roughly $25,000 a year. Meanwhile, Ferrari ownership can easily run into the $15,000 to $30,000 per year range, depending on the car and how you use it. So theoretically, someone could spend more than half of an average year's Social Security income just keeping the Ferrari on the road, and that's before buying the Ferrari itself. But here's the part that makes this even more interesting. Ferrari actually does something that can dramatically reduce the cost of owning a newer car. For the first 7 years, Ferrari's genuine maintenance program covers scheduled maintenance on qualifying vehicles. That means the story isn't simply Ferrari equals financial stupidity. There is a way to make Ferrari ownership considerably more manageable. But there's still one number we haven't calculated. The number that tells you whether you can actually afford the Ferrari in the first place. And when we apply a commonly cited financial rule to a $280,000 Ferrari, we don't get $500,000. We don't even get $1 million. We get a number that is going to completely change the way you look at owning one in retirement. So let's say you've already crossed the biggest hurdle. You've got the Ferrari. It's sitting in your garage. And for the first few weeks, every time you open that garage door, you get that feeling. The badge, the engine, the smell of a car you spent decades dreaming about. But then reality starts creeping in. Because a Ferrari isn't expensive only when something breaks. It's expensive simply because it's a Ferrari. Take insurance, depending on the model, driver, location, and coverage. Ferrari insurance can average somewhere around $5,300 to $7,800 a year. That's hundreds of dollars every single month, even if the car spends most of its life sitting in your garage. And then there's fuel. Ferraris aren't exactly designed around fuel economy. A Ferrari Roma can cost roughly $3,250 a year in fuel, while something like an F8 Spider can approach $3,850 depending on driving habits. Now, if you're retired and only taking the Ferrari out on weekends, You might think, here's something that might surprise you. Ferrari actually gives owners of qualifying cars a pretty significant benefit. Its genuine maintenance program covers scheduled maintenance for the first 7 years of ownership, oil filters, fluids, belts, spark plugs, and other scheduled maintenance. So if you buy the right Ferrari at the right time, those first 7 years can be considerably less painful than people imagine, and the maintenance plan can even transfer to subsequent owners. That means if you buy a Ferrari that's only 2 years old, you may still have years of scheduled maintenance coverage remaining. Sounds great, and it is. But there's a catch. 7 years eventually becomes 8, and that's when the Ferrari starts asking you a different question. How much did you really plan to spend on me? Once that maintenance coverage is gone, routine servicing can move into the thousands of dollars per year. Now let's put everything together: insurance, maintenance, fuel, tires, brakes, storage, detailing, and unexpected repairs. The research puts typical Ferrari ownership costs in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $30,000 a year, depending heavily on the model, age, and how the car is used. And that's an important distinction. We're talking about owning the car, not buying it, not financing it, not paying the sales tax, not paying interest, just keeping the thing in your life. Over 10 years, that could mean roughly $150,000 to $300,000 in running costs. That's enough money to make you pause, because $300,000 is almost another Ferrari. And this is where the retirement question gets uncomfortable. If you're still working, maybe you can absorb an unexpected $10,000 repair. If you're retired and your income is fixed, that same repair can feel completely different. It's no longer "that's annoying." It becomes, where is that money coming from? Your savings, your investment portfolio, your emergency fund, or worse, money that was supposed to pay for something you actually needed. And that's why buying a Ferrari in retirement isn't really a question about whether you can afford the car. It's whether you can afford the financial shockwaves that come with the car. And then there's another argument Ferrari owners sometimes make. Don't worry, it's a Ferrari, it'll hold its value. Sometimes that's true, but it's a dangerous assumption. Because not every Ferrari becomes a collectible. Some older Ferraris have performed incredibly well. Cars like the F355, 360 and 458 have shown strong collector interest. And then you have the absolute monsters of the Ferrari world. The Ferrari 250 GTO is the extreme example. Only 36 were produced, and examples have reached around $52 million at auction. But here's the mistake. Looking at a $52 million Ferrari, and assuming your brand new Ferrari is going to behave the same way, it probably won't. Many modern Ferraris, including models such as the Roma, SF90, and 296 GTB have experienced meaningful depreciation in the used market. Some recent models have reportedly fallen by significant percentages from their original prices. So if you're buying a Ferrari because you think it's automatically an investment, stop. You're buying a luxury car first. An investment only if the market eventually proves it to be one. And that distinction could save a retiree hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because the worst possible scenario isn't buying a Ferrari that depreciates. It's buying one believing it's an investment, and then discovering you paid $280,000 for something the market now values dramatically less. But there's still one question. We've talked about the purchase price. We've talked about the annual costs. We've talked about depreciation. We've talked about retirement income. But what if we look at this from the opposite direction? Instead of asking, can I somehow afford a Ferrari? Let's ask the question wealthy people actually should be asking. How much of my total wealth should a Ferrari represent? And that's where the math gets really interesting. So let's flip the question. Forget the Ferrari's horsepower. Forget the leather. Forget the badge. Forget how fast it can go. Let's talk about something much less exciting. Your net worth. Because if you're retired, the real question isn't, can I make the monthly payment? It's, can I buy this car without putting a meaningful dent in everything I've spent my life building? And that's a completely different calculation. Financial guidance cited in our research suggests that a luxury vehicle shouldn't represent more than roughly 7.5% of your net worth. Now take a Ferrari that costs around $280,000. If that Ferrari represents 7.5% of everything you own, the math starts getting uncomfortable very quickly, because we're no longer talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about millions. And that's before we even consider your retirement income, your house, your investments, your emergency fund, your healthcare costs, and everything else you're going to need for the next 20 or 30 years. So before we reveal the number, there's something important to understand. A Ferrari can be affordable for someone with a $1 million net worth. They might technically be able to buy it. They might even be able to make the payments. But affordable and financially responsible are not the same thing. Imagine two retirees. The first has $1 million in total net worth. They see a $280,000 Ferrari. They put down a large payment. They finance the rest. They tell themselves, I worked my whole life. I deserve this. And emotionally, they're right. They probably do deserve something nice. But financially, that Ferrari represents an enormous portion of everything they've accumulated. Now, imagine another retiree. They have $4 million invested, their house is paid off, they have healthcare covered, they have retirement income coming in, and they buy the same Ferrari, same car, same engine, same badge, completely different financial reality. For the first retiree, the Ferrari could become one of the largest financial decisions of their retirement. For the second, it's a luxury purchase. And that's the difference we're trying to find. The point where the Ferrari stops being something you can technically afford and becomes something you can own without constantly thinking about the money. And we're almost at that number. But before we do the math, if you enjoy these breakdowns of what expensive American lifestyles actually cost beyond the price tag, subscribe to Broke Dad, because the goal here isn't to tell you what you should buy. It's to show you what these decisions actually look like when the excitement wears off and the numbers arrive. Now let's do the calculation. Take that $280,000 Ferrari and divide it by the 7.5% guideline. The result? Approximately $3.73 million. That's the net worth you'd need for a $280,000 Ferrari to represent roughly 7.5% of your total wealth. Read that again. $3.7 million, not $280,000, not $500,000, not even $1 million, around $3.7 million. And suddenly, that Ferrari sitting on the dealership floor looks very different. Because the question isn't, can I find a way to buy this? Of course you probably can. The question is, can I buy this and still feel financially secure? That's the real luxury. Because if you have $3.7 million in net worth and spend $280,000 on the Ferrari, you still have the overwhelming majority of your wealth left. But if you have $500,000 and spend $280,000, you've just committed more than half of everything you've built to one depreciating machine. That's not financial freedom. Now let's bring this back to the average American retiree. Because $3.7 million sounds like a ridiculous number until you compare it with what the average retiree actually receives. The average Social Security retirement benefit in June 2026 was around $2,084 a month. That's roughly $25,000 a year. Now remember the Ferrari. Insurance alone can average around $650 a month. That's nearly a third of the average monthly Social Security check. And then there's fuel, maintenance, tires, storage, repairs. Suddenly, the Ferrari isn't just a luxury sitting in your garage. It's consuming a meaningful amount of money every single month. And this is why the retirement angle matters so much. Because when you're working, your income can potentially grow. You can work overtime, change jobs, start a business, wait for a promotion. But once you're retired, the game changes. You have a finite pool of assets. And every unnecessary expense has an opportunity cost. That $30,000 you spend keeping the Ferrari, that's $30,000 that can't compound in your portfolio. It can't pay for a future medical bill. It can't fund a vacation with your family. It can't simply sit there and give you peace of mind. And that's the uncomfortable truth about buying a Ferrari in retirement. The question isn't whether you can afford the Ferrari today. It's whether you'll still be happy you bought it 10 years from now. So does this mean you should never buy a Ferrari in retirement? No, and that's important. Because this isn't a video about telling wealthy retirees that they shouldn't enjoy their money. If you've worked for decades, saved responsibly, paid off your debts and built several $million in wealth, there's nothing inherently wrong with buying the car you've dreamed about your entire life. In fact, if you have around $3.7 million or more in net worth, a $280,000 Ferrari becomes a very different proposition. But even that number isn't a magic permission slip. You still need to ask, is your house paid off? Do you have enough money invested to support decades of retirement? Can you handle a major medical expense? Do you have an emergency fund? And most importantly, would buying the Ferrari force you to change the way you live? Because if the answer is yes, you probably can't afford it. A luxury car should make your retirement more enjoyable. And this is where Ferrari ownership gets interesting. Because the people who can most comfortably afford a Ferrari aren't necessarily the people who are obsessed with the price. They don't need to calculate whether they can afford the next tank of premium fuel. They don't panic when a tire needs replacing. They don't lose sleep when a repair bill reaches 5 figures. Why? Because the Ferrari is small compared with everything else they own. And that's the entire point of the 7.5% rule. It's not really about Ferrari. It's about financial freedom. If buying a $280,000 car barely changes your financial position, you're wealthy enough for the car to be a luxury. But if buying it changes what you can afford to do for the next decade, then the car owns you. And that's a very different kind of ownership. Because there's nothing luxurious about sitting behind the wheel of a Ferrari while secretly wondering whether you should have kept the money invested. So here's the simplest test. Imagine you buy the Ferrari tomorrow. Then, 1 month later, something goes wrong. A major repair, a medical expense, a market crash, your investments fall, your income drops. Can you still look at that Ferrari sitting in your garage and feel completely comfortable? Or would you start thinking, maybe I shouldn't have bought this? If the second thought appears, don't buy it. Because retirement isn't the time to prove that you can afford something. It's the time to make sure you've built a life where you don't have to worry about money anymore. And that's why the real number isn't $280,000. It's not even $3.7 million. The real number is whatever amount allows you to buy the Ferrari while still protecting everything that actually matters: your home, your health, your family, your investments, your future, and your peace of mind.